habit. So whatever you do is what you do. And when I was reading, like there were moments when I was just reading on my phone, and I was really good at reading on my phone. I would go to a coffee shop and I could just read for hours on my little phone, or anytime I had spare time, I could do that. And then that like fell away, and I haven't done that for a long time.
What's a long time?
Probably like 6 months.
Okay.
That's a long time for me to not be reading books. Like I used to be reading like 4 books at once all the time.
I've never been good at that multitasking thing.
I actually liked it. It made me better at reading, because whenever one would get boring to me, I would jump to the other. And so in that way, you're like keeping up it's kind of like exercise, right? Where like you do different things, right? And that probably like helps you like keep exercising, because if you like don't feel like training or whatever, then you go do something else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. My only problem is that if something got boring and I switched to the next one, it would still be boring. Because I checked out because it's boring. Yeah.
You would still like categorize it as boring? You don't think like, I'm finding this boring. It's not that it's actually boring.
I don't know.
I mean, maybe I have a high tolerance for boring books, too.
I think my dad, there's people who just will like, I'm all the time talking about my dad or my nephew.
Yeah.
That's really
Men in your life.
Will finishes every book that he picks up, because that's like just what he does. I am the opposite. For the longest time, I thought I didn't like reading because I didn't want to read any of the books that I was reading.
What were you reading?
Just like stuff that I was assigned for school. I just didn't. The dynamic of being told when to be done with something. You have to read 7 chapters and what. I just like didn't function well like that.
Yeah, if you have like anything around school and being told what to do,
yeah,
it can make you really anti-book.
Yeah.
I didn't enjoy any books we had to read in class.
Yeah, me either. There was a couple that I liked.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really didn't enjoy that. The dynamic of it, so that's the same reason I don't use library books.
Oh.
Because there's like when something's about to run out, it makes me feel like I'm being told when to finish it.
But you can just renew it.
How easy is that?
So easy. And you can renew it unless someone else wants it like 3 times. So you can have a book out for like 2 months. At least. You just go onto your like, you click a button. And then it's renewed. You can also probably, I don't know if you want to do this. There's probably a way to put library books on your Kindle.
Yeah, there are. There is.
Yeah.
There are. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
You can check out Audible books too. Which I don't understand.
What do you mean?
You can borrow Audible books from the library. Is this thing on?
Yeah.
Oh shit.
Yeah.
Just been boring this whole time.
No, it's been really interesting about reading.
Yeah, I don't know what it means, but I know that you can do it.
Borrow Audible books?
Yes.
I guess that makes sense, because I know they have their own, but you mean like the company Audible. Like I know.
No. I don't.
I think that's what you said.
Maybe.
Okay, but audiobooks, yes, you can.
Right. What's an Audible book?
Like of the company Audible. Which I don't personally. Okay, these are my feeling. My feeling toward Audible is it's far too expensive. And I
love it.
So I have a membership. It's $20 a month, which you're like, oh, great. But no. You get a credit a month.
That's one plan.
There's multiple plans now?
There's been multiple plans for many years.
Okay, I don't know this. I just think like $20 a book is actually like quite a lot.
No, it's not $20 a book.
Basically, if it's one credit.
Maybe that plan is, but that's not the like eternal cost of a book on Audible.
No, because sometimes they're like discounted. Wait, what do you do?
I have like a large, like I could buy like 20 books right now. So I have like access to all the credits that I have. Like, it's not titrated. My credits are not titrated.
Okay. Because I keep meaning to cancel it. And I want to use up my credits before I do that. And then,
but how can you use up?
I can't be the only one. I think this is what happens to a lot of people. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to cancel my membership. So I'm going to use up my credits. And then I go on to Audible and I start browsing through what to get. Mm-hmm. And then I get so indecisive about what to spend my credits on. Mm-hmm. I don't buy anything, or maybe I get like one book, and then I close the website and I don't cancel it.
That's really weird.
That's a lot of pressure to be like, okay, these are the last books
you get to have. The last books you get to have.
No, but I'm canceling my subscription. So like, what are going to be the books?
Just the first 3 books.
Just the first 3 I see.
Well,
just
3 like, meaning bing. No, like whichever ones you are interested in. However many credits I said 3 because in my mind there were 3 credits.
It's like Netflix, but for books though. I can't decide.
But you can decide on Netflix all the time.
But I do this on Audible too, where I like listen to a book. I actually don't have a problem with like not finishing an audiobook. Mm-hmm. So sometimes I start listening and I'm like, I don't like this, and then I return it. Mm-hmm. So for me to like, it's a lot of, it's so much pressure.
That you might have to return it?
That I might not be satisfied with my final last meal Audible books.
But if you return it, it won't be your last meal.
I don't know what the rules are to cancel your subscription at that point.
I'm sure they still honor the like, you give a credit, take a credit.
Yeah, but what I understand is that once you cancel, your credits are void.
I don't know. It's linked to Amazon. They are like have the most excellent customer service, and their business model is not based on like the way the business functions is like it's a little bit like Trader Joe's. You don't have to prove anything to them.
You're like, can you open this? I want to try.
Yeah, that or you can be like, I bought this here yesterday. I don't have the receipt, but it's bad. And they're like, oh, okay. They trust you implicitly, and that's part of the way the company functions. In the same way, Amazon will do like pretty much anything to make something right. It's part of their what makes them successful as a business. And Audible is the same way. If you're like, I don't like any of the books that I've ever read, they'll be like, okay.
Okay. I was just going off the message boards.
Message boards about
what happens to your credits when you cancel your Audible subscription.
Well, just cancel it. Just lose the credits.
No!
Then decide.
That's $120 on the table.
Then
I have a lot of books I need to listen to.
If you have a lot of books you need to listen to, then don't cancel it. Just listen to the books.
Hi.
That's all we have time for today.
So thanks for tuning in.
Ma loves it.
I want to say this too. I also want to cancel my Audible because I've discovered something better, although limited. And yes, there's the library too. Like, that's one more thing. It's like free. But have you ever used Scribed? So for $9 a month, you get access to like unlimited. And they have audiobooks as well as books, as well as like sheet music. That's actually like why I first got it. And like articles and documents and all these different things. So I've been able to find a lot of audiobooks on there. And I'm like, oh, I would much rather just use this.
So then there's literally no stake in just picking books for the last few credits, canceling the subscription and moving on.
Okay, I'll do it. Yes.
I don't know why I'm so excited because I love Audible. But I don't want you to be tormented by it.
I just, got a lot of subscriptions. Need to cut back.
There's like an app that's like, figure out what subscriptions you don't know that you have.
It's probably a really scary amount. Yeah.
Yeah. I just got a thing that was like, you are now a Meetup. Like, yeah, I got a thing that was like, your Meetup Pro free trial has just ended.
Meetup Pro?
Yes. So like, here we go with your Meetup Pro life. And I was like, whoa.
Have you ever been Meetup Basic?
I mean, I've had the app.
Yeah, but I mean, do you ever meet up?
The last time I did was probably like 4 years ago. Yeah, maybe 3-4 years ago.
Okay. Meetup Pro. What are the perks of being a pro member?
I have no idea. Because I didn't try it. It's like an admin. It's like you can like have your own. I don't know, because you actually can do that anyway on Meetup Regular, I think.
Like you could have your own meetup?
Yeah, but you can start a meetup no matter what, I think. I have no idea. It's really irritating. I wrote to them being like, I have never.
What were you paying?
I didn't. What was I paying? 0.
Oh, okay.
Well, I don't know with Pro if I'm paying something now.
Okay.
I know I've been paying 0 for this whole time because Meetup doesn't cost money.
Okay.
But I can't say the same for the Pro.
Well, I don't know. You should look into that.
I tried, but
I think now Meetup might be having a problem right now.
Yeah.
They might be down in popularity.
I reckon they are. So I don't know if my version's going to match your version.
Okay, we're going to find out. We've upgraded to Kindle. Ooh. Where are we? We're in chapter 15 of book 2.
Mm-hmm.
And what has happened?
The war has begun.
Yes. War. There's battles. Prince Andrew is going to save everyone.
He has delusions of grandeur. And it's not going well for the Russians. Because apparently the French keep just sauntering over and being like, look over there! Yeah. And the Russians are like, where?
Oh, those dirty Frenchmen.
They play fast and loose with the treachery.
They really do. There was a description about what's going on in terms of the troops. Let's see if I can remember this. There's a bunch of like different cities that I'm like, what's happening? The thing with the bridge is that the French overtook the bridge.
Like what we're talking about, like there's one bridge.
There's one bridge.
The European bridge.
The
bridge to Europe.
What's the river though?
Either the Danube
or the Danube?
I don't
know. And a General Schmidt died. And anyway, so there's something going on around like the French are going to hold run, I want to say. There's all these cities that I don't know about. Oh, no, should we not be know anything about this?
I never did pretend that I know anything about what's happening. I was very, very impressed though when you were like, here I go. About to synthesize what we read.
Yeah, because it's about like it's a timing thing. Like right
it's
now,
all about timing.
No, I think it's like that. No, like the Austrians, right? They're with Austria.
Who's with Austria?
Russia.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So if they can meet up together, they can potentially like protect themselves in the city. But right now they're separated, I think. So the French are like going like full speed ahead, trying to hit Russia, I want to say?
No, they've just overtaken like big cities in Austria.
Yeah, I know they've done that. I don't.
But that happens like after Andrew has gone off, because the first bridge, he like takes news of some battle and then goes to like let so and so know about it.
Yeah.
And that's when he finds out that these cities have fallen.
Yeah.
The Austrian cities.
Yeah.
So I thought you were talking about that bridge, but that's not the bridge you're talking about.
No, I'm talking about something else that we learned in a very. How did we even learn about that? Who was talking about that? There was a letter from Napoleon. Finally showed up too, in a letter, and he's like, Frenchmen, like, do not stop, go and conquer. Yours truly, Napoleon.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
mm-hmm.
It's pretty word for word what was in that letter.
Mm-hmm.
But then I think the French were trying to do another little ruse, like, oh, let's pretend we'll play nice. But this time, it did not work.
Did I take drugs yesterday?
There was something to that effect.
I mean, I believe you.
Okay.
I just have no idea what's.
Hopefully, we'll just find out.
Yeah, I'm sure he'll repeat himself numerous times.
Probably.
Yeah.
Okay. Chapter 15. And we'll see. Okay.
Tell me if it's different.
Yeah. Okay. I'll just cut in.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, that's very acceptable on this. Like, you don't have to like be Canadian. Okay, ready?
Yeah.
Between 3 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Prince Andrew, who had persisted in his request to Kutuzov, arrived at Grunth and reported himself to Bagration. Bagration. Bonaparte's adjutant, I wonder what it is, had not yet reached Murat's detachment, and the battle had not yet begun. In Bagration's detachment, no one knew anything of the general position of affairs. They talked of peace, but did not believe in its possibility. Others talked of a battle, but also disbelieved in the nearness of an engagement. Bagration, knowing Bolkonsky to be a favorite and trusted adjutant, received him with distinction and special marks of favor, explaining to him that there would probably be an engagement that day or the next, and giving him full liberty to remain with him during the battle or to join the rear guard and have an eye on the order of retreat, which is also very important.
However, there will hardly be an engagement today, said Bagration, as if to reassure Prince Andrew.
If he is one of the ordinary little staff dandies sent to earn a medal, he can get his reward just as well in the rear guard. But if he wishes to stay with me, let him. He'll be of use here if he's a brave officer, thought Bagration. Prince Andrew, without replying, asked the prince's permission to ride round the position to see the disposition of the forces, so as to know his bearings should he be sent to execute an order. The officer on duty, a handsome, elegantly dressed man with a diamond ring on his forefinger, who was fond of speaking French, though he spoke it badly, offered to conduct Prince Andrew.
On all sides, they saw rain-soaked officers with dejected faces who seemed to be seeking something, and soldiers dragging doors, benches, and fencing from the village.
There now, Prince, we can't stop those fellows, said the staff officer, pointing to the soldiers. The officers don't keep them in. Are you okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Just spilling on myself.
It's because you're drinking out of a jar.
Continue.
The officers don't keep them in hand, and there, he pointed to a sutler's tent. They crowd in and sit. This morning I turned them all out, and now look, it's full again. I must go there, Prince, and scare them a bit. It won't take a moment.
Yes, let's go in, and I will get myself a roll and some cheese, said Prince Andrew, who had not yet had time to eat anything.
There was a limit on cheese and meat at the grocery store.
Was there?
Yeah, I was like, why would anyone want those things? For the freezer? Because that stuff doesn't stay.
I don't know, but that stuff is scarce.
It is?
Like when I went to Whole Foods, I mean, this is not like real cheese, but what I found really surprising, the vegan section had been cleared, including all the vegan cheeses.
Right.
And I was like, who's like, oh, gotta get my vegan sour cream right now?
You, because you went to the section.
I did want to.
Looking for the... I did want it.
But I wouldn't have taken like 5 home. That's crazy. I would have taken 1.
You would have?
Yeah.
Oh, 1.
I think there should be a limit.
1 is such a quaint number these days.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, like, you want 1?
Like looking at people's baskets, it's like, who's being?
Yeah. I didn't eat. Why didn't you mention it, Prince? I would have offered you something.
They dismounted and entered the tent. Several officers with flushed and weary faces were sitting at the table eating and drinking.
Now what does this mean, gentlemen? Said the staff officer in the reproachful tone of a man who has repeated the same thing more than once. You know it won't do to leave your post like this. The prince gave orders that no one should leave his post. Now you, captain. And he turned to a thin, dirty little artillery officer who, without his boots, he had given them to the canteen keeper to dry, in only his stockings, rose when he entered, smiling not altogether comfortably.
Well, aren't you ashamed of yourself, Captain Tushin? He continued. One would think that as an artillery officer you would set a good example. Yet here you are, without your boots. The alarm will be sounded and you'll be in a pretty position without your boots. The staff officer smiled. Kindly return to your post, gentlemen. All of you, all, he added in a tone of command.
Prince Andrew smiled involuntarily as he looked at the artillery officer Tushin, who, silent and smiling, shifting from one stockinged foot to the other, glanced inquiringly with his large, intelligent, kindly eyes from Prince Andrew to the staff officer.
The soldiers say it feels easier without boots, said Captain Tushin, smiling shyly in his uncomfortable position, evidently wishing to adopt a jocular tone. But before he had finished, he felt that his jest was unacceptable and had not come off. He grew confused.
Kindly return to your post, said the staff officer, trying to preserve his gravity.
Prince Andrew glanced again at the artillery officer's small figure. There was something peculiar about it, quite unsoldierly, rather comic, but extremely attractive.
What? The staff officer and Prince Andrew mounted their horses and rode on.
Maybe Prince Andrew just doesn't like women.
Yeah, I thought about that.
I don't know. And I mean that honestly, but I don't think that'll be in this book.
I don't know.
Okay. Having ridden beyond the village, continually meeting and overtaking soldiers and officers of various regiments, they saw on their left some entrenchments being thrown up, the freshly dug clay of which showed up red. Several battalions of soldiers in their shirt sleeves, despite the cold wind, swarmed in these earthworks like a host of white ants. Spadefuls of red clay were continually being thrown up from behind the bank by unseen hands. Prince Andrew and the officer rode up, looked at the entrenchment, and went on again. Just behind it, they came upon some dozens of soldiers, continually replaced by others, who ran from the entrenchment. They had to hold their noses and put their horses to a trot to escape from the poisoned atmosphere of these latrines.
Voilà l'agrément des camps, Monsieur le Prince. Prince? How do you say prince?
Prince.
Prince.
But
said the staff.
Prince.
Prince.
They wrote
Monsieur le Prince. Do you ever see the really stupid remake of the Pink Panther?
With Steve Martin? No.
Yeah. It's like really worth it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so stupid. But just the advertisements, the like, what do you call it? Trailers, the ads for it on TV. I was like cracking up from just the ads. I don't remember the last time that ever happened. There's this like really absurd scene where he's trying to get accent reduction It's because his accent's so bad.
Right.
That's just part of the whole thing. So he like goes to this woman to get his accent like reduced.
Like how you say accent. Anyway, continue.
His accent.
Thank you.
He went to get his accent reduced. So she's like, I would like to buy a hamburger. I don't know what she's trying to get him, how she's trying to get him to talk. Maybe some British thing. Yeah. And he's like, I would like to buy or something. And then literally the scene is like probably 60 seconds long and they're just going back and forth. And she like almost like she's not registering how horrible it is. It's just like, I would like to buy a hamburger. I would like to buy a hamburger. I would like over and over again. And his keeps getting worse and worse. And at the end, he's like banging the table and is like, I would like a burger. It just gets stupider. It's really dumb. But it's dumb in the best possible way.
That actually makes me want to see it.
Yeah, it's really stupid.
I can't decide whether I like Steve Martin or not.
I don't have a like across the board feeling about him, but I love him in this.
Whoa.
Yeah, which is just gives the randomest thing. It's like, I don't know.
Yeah. Did you see? You saw the originals, right?
I don't think I did.
No.
I might have gone.
That's just it. I feel like I couldn't see it because I have such an allegiance to the originals and Peter Sellers.
He's probably not nearly as ridiculous as Steve Martin, and
different.
Right, but stylistically, I don't think he is as ridiculous. Not in any of the other stuff I've seen him in.
You know what I just thought of that I'm like, oh, is that kind of what Steve Carell is doing? It's almost a Michael Scott.
What?
Like, there's something similar. I just put these two together. Like,
who and who?
In the way that, like, Michael Scott doesn't know, like, what a joke he is, Peter Sellers is kind of that.
Very funny.
What?
It says they speak Spanish. We have flawless, impeccable French accents. So, I don't know what you mean. Unless there was Spanish. Sorry.
I don't know. I just put those two together and I'm like, oh, is that what they're doing?
Who and who?
Michael, like Steve Carell and Peter Sellers. I'm like, oh, I think there's something similar going on there. Anyway. But Peter Sellers is, like, he's a genius.
Mm-hmm.
He's a genius. But maybe there's something less silly about it. There's something less winky about it. That's what I will say. Like, Steve Martin, whenever I see him, I don't, like, fully... There's something, like... He's kind of, like, checking out the camera, I feel like.
Yeah, that's because he's not doing the same thing.
Yeah.
He's not, like... It's not real. It's not the same, like, thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's like saying Jim Carrey knows the camera's there. Like, that's part of the whole...
Right. Yeah.
It's like part of his...
Definitely.
It's not the same style. It's not the same, like...
It's like Jerry Seinfeld. Yeah, it's like Seinfeld.
What about him?
You never watched that?
I've seen it.
Yeah. I've seen it. Okay, anyway.
What's that?
What were we talking about? Planks.
Because he's like, you bet that.
Where are we? They rode up the opposite hill. From there, the French could already be seen. Prince Andrew stopped and began examining the position.
That's our battery, said the staff officer, indicating the highest point. It's in charge of the queer fellow we saw without his boots. Oh, it's in his charge. You can see everything from...
Thank you very much. I will go on alone, said Prince Andrew, wishing to rid himself of the staff officer's company. Please don't trouble yourself further.
The staff officer remained behind. Prince Andrew rode on alone.
The farther forward and nearer the enemy he went, the more orderly and cheerful were the troops. The greatest disorder and depression had been in the baggage train he had passed that morning on the Znaim road 7 miles away from the French. At Grunth, also some apprehension and alarm could be felt. But the nearer Prince Andrew came to the French lines, the more confident was the appearance of our troops. The soldiers in their greatcoats were ranged in lines. The sergeants major and company officers were counting the men, poking the last man in each section in the ribs, and telling him to hold his hand up. Soldiers scattered over the whole place were dragging logs and brushwood and were building shelters with merry chatter and laughter. Around the fire sat others, dressed and undressed, drying their shirts and leg bands or mending boots or overcoats and crowding round the boilers and porridge cookers. In one company, dinner was ready, and the soldiers were gazing eagerly at the steaming boiler, waiting till the sample, which a quartermaster sergeant was carrying in a wooden bowl to an officer who sat on a log before his shelter, had been tasted.
Another company, a lucky one for not all the companies had vodka, crowded round a pock-marked, broad-shouldered sergeant major, who, tilting a keg, filled one after another the canteen lids held out to him. The soldiers lifted the canteen lids to their lips with reverential faces, emptied them, rolling the vodka in their mouths, and walked away from the sergeant major with brightened expression, licking their lips and wiping them on the sleeves of their greatcoats. All their faces were as serene as if all this were happening at home, awaiting peaceful encampment, and not within sight of the enemy before an action in which at least half of them would be left on the field. After passing a chasseur regiment and in the lines of the Kiev Grenadiers, yes, fine fellows busy with similar peaceful affairs, near the shelter of the regimental commander, higher than and different from the others, Prince Andrew came out in front of a platoon of grenadiers before whom lay a naked man. 2 soldiers held him while 2 others were flourishing their switches and striking him regularly on his bare back. The man shrieked unnaturally. A stout major was pacing up and down the line and, regardless of the screams, kept repeating,
"It's a shame for a soldier to steal. A soldier must be honest, honorable, and brave. But if he robs his fellows, there is no honor in him. He's a scoundrel. Go on! Go on!"
So the swishing sound of the strokes and the desperate but unnatural screams continued.
"Go on! Go on!" said the major.
A young officer with a bewildered and pained expression on his face stepped away from the man and looked round inquiringly at the adjutant as he rode by.
Prince Andrew, having reached the front line, rode along it. Our front line and that of the enemy were far apart on the right and left flanks. But in the center, where the men with the flag of truce had passed that morning, the lines were so near together that the men could see one another's faces and speak to one another. Beside the soldiers, who formed the picket line on either side, there were many curious onlookers who, jesting and laughing, stared at their strange foreign enemies.
Since early morning, despite an injunction not to approach the picket line, the officers had been able to keep sightseers away. Okay. The soldiers forming the picket line, like showmen exhibiting a curiosity, no longer looked at the French, but paid attention to the sightseers, and grew weary waiting to be relieved. Prince Andrew halted to have a look at the French.
Look there," one soldier was saying to another, pointing to a Russian musketeer who had gone up to the picket line with an officer and was rapidly and excitedly talking to a French grenadier. "Hark to him jabbering. Fine, isn't it? It's all the French you can do to keep up with him. There now, Sidorov."
"Wait a bit and listen, it's fine," answered Sidorov, who was considered an adept at French.
The soldier to whom the laughers referred was Dolokhov. I was wondering when he was going to show up. Prince Andrew recognized him and stopped to listen to what he was saying. Dolokhov had come from the left flank, where their regiment was stationed, with his captain.
"Now then, go on," incited the officer, bending forward and trying not to lose a word of this speech, which was incomprehensible to him. "More, please, more. What's he saying?"
Dolokhov did not answer the captain. He had been drawn into a hot dispute with the French grenadier. They were naturally talking about the campaign. The Frenchman, confusing the Austrians with the Russians, was trying to prove that the Russians had surrendered and had fled all the way from Ulm, while Dolokhov maintained that the Russians had not surrendered but had beaten them.
"Here, have you off," said Dolokhov.
"Only take you and your Cossacks are not all captured," said the French grenadier.
The French onlookers and listeners laughed.
"We'll make you dance as we did under Suvorov," said Dolokhov.
Qu'est-ce
qu'il chante?
They're so spread apart in mine that I was like,
Qu'est-ce?
Oh, whoops. Qu'est-ce qu'il chante? Asked a Frenchman, sorry.
It's ancient history, said another, guessing that it referred to a former war. The emperor will teach you Suvara as he has taught the others.
Bonaparte, began Dolokhov, but the Frenchman interrupted him.
Not Bonaparte. He is the emperor, sacrément, cried he angrily.
The devil skin your emperor.
And Dolokhov swore at him in coarse soldier's Russian, and shouldering his musket, walked away.
Let us go, Ivan Lukich, he said to the captain.
That's the way to talk French, said the picket soldiers. Now, Sidorov, you have a try.
Sidorov, turning to the French, winked and began to jabber meaningless sounds very fast. Kari mala tafa safi muter kaska, he said, trying to give an expressive intonation to his voice.
Ho ho ho, ha ha ha, ooh ooh, came peals of such healthy and good-humored laughter from the soldiers that it infected the French involuntarily. So much so that the only thing left to do seemed to be to unload the muskets, explode the ammunition, and all return home as quickly as possible.
What? But the guns remained loaded. The loopholes in blockhouses and entrenchments looked out just as menacingly, and the unlimbered cannon confronted one another as before. Cool. They overruled their impulses for friendship.
It's very interesting. They're together.
Mm.
It must be so weird. Like, what's amazing to me is how they're like, there's like a killing time. It's like, okay, now we're allowed to kill each other, but not now. So we'll just be breathing the same air until that happens.
But what do you like, as opposed to having no honor?
Just actually like doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Wait, what doesn't make sense? But in what way do you?
In that, and I mean, it doesn't make sense in terms of like war really doesn't make sense because there has to be rules to it, otherwise it can't function.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that there are rules is like, oh, so like you guys don't have to kill each other. In which case, why don't you just not kill each other?
Devil's advocate. Having rules doesn't mean you don't have to kill each other.
I mean, there can be some restraint. So why not just restrain yourselves?
It's not because people are incapable of restraint that we go to war.
No, I know that. It's all very organized.
Yeah, because there's a thing of like, this is how we settle disputes.
Right.
That's why there's something orderly to it. War is not a free-for-all.
No,
you know?
But it is a weird way to settle disputes. Just be like, whoever's left standing.
It's sort of weird, but it's also not. Because, like, that's how animals do.
That's what I was thinking about, but I was like, yeah, but maybe I'm wrong, actually. Maybe the animals do the exact same thing. But when I think of animals, it's like they'll kind of just attack. Right?
No, that's true.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they do, like, they don't do things excessively for cruelty for the most part. I'm sure they obey something that protects the greater good.
Right.
Of the herd. It's not like
it's not just
a free for all.
Yeah, okay.
Chapter 16. Having ridden round the whole line from right flank to left, Prince battery officer had told him the whole field could be. Here he dismounted and stopped beside the farthest of the 4 unlimbered cannon. Before the guns, an artillery sentry was pacing up and down. He stood at attention when the officer arrived, but at a sign resumed his measured, monotonous pacing. Behind the guns were their limbers, and still farther back, picket ropes and artillerymen's bonfires. To the left, not far from the farthest cannon, was a small, newly constructed wattle shed, from which came the sound of officers' voices in eager conversation.
It was true that a view over nearly the whole Russian position and the greater part of the enemy's opened out from this battery. Just facing it, on the crest of the opposite hill, the village of Schöngrabern could be seen, and in 3 places to left and right the French troops, amid the smoke of their campfires, the greater part of whom were evidently in the village itself and behind the hill. To the left, from that village, amid the smoke, was something resembling a battery, but it was impossible to see it clearly with the naked eye. Our right flank was posted on a rather steep incline, which dominated the French position. Our infantry was stationed there, and at the furthest point the dragoons. In the center, where Tushin's battery stood and from which Prince Andrew was surveying the position, was the easiest and most direct descent and ascent to the brook separating us from Schöngrabern. On the left, our troops were close to a copse, in which smoked the bonfires of our infantry who were felling wood. The French line was wider than ours, and it was plain that they could easily outflank us on both sides. Behind our position was a steep and deep dip, making it difficult for artillery and cavalry to retire. Prince Andrew took out his notebook and, leaning on the cannon, sketched a plan of the position. He made some notes on 2 points, intending to mention them to Bagration. His idea was, first, to concentrate all the artillery in the center, and secondly, to withdraw the cavalry to the other side of the dip. Prince Andrew, being always near the commander-in-chief, closely following the mass movements and general orders, and constantly studying historical accounts of battles, involuntarily pictured to himself the course of events and the forthcoming action in broad outline. He imagined only important possibilities. If the enemy attacks the right flank, he said to himself, the Kiev Grenadiers and the Podolsk Chasseurs must hold their position till reserves from the center come up. In that case, the dragoons could successfully make a flank counterattack. If they attack our center, we, having the center battery on this high ground, shall withdraw the left flank under its cover, and retreat to the dip by echelons. Right. So he reasoned. All the time he had been beside the gun, he had heard the voices of the officers distinctly, but as often happens, had not understood a word of what they were saying. Suddenly, however, he was struck by a voice coming from the shed, and its tone was so sincere that he could not but listen.
"No, friend," said a pleasant and, as it seemed to Prince Andrew, familiar voice. "What I say is that if it were possible to know what is beyond death, none of us," that's so weird, "none of us would be afraid of it. That's so, friend."
Another, younger voice interrupted him. "Afraid or not, you can't escape it anyhow."
"All the same, one is afraid." "Oh, you clever people," said a third manly voice, interrupting them both. "Of course you artillerymen are very wise, because you can take everything along with you, vodka and snacks."
And the owner of the manly voice, evidently an infantry officer, laughed.
"Yes, one is afraid," continued the first speaker, he of the familiar voice. "One is afraid of the unknown. That's what it is. Whatever we may say about the soul going to the sky, we know there is no sky, but only an atmosphere."
The manly voice again interrupted the artillery officer.
"Well, stand us some of your vodka, Tushin," it said.
"Why," thought Prince Andrew, "that's the captain who stood up in the settler's hut without his boots." He recognized the agreeable, philosophizing voice with pleasure.
"Some vodka? Certainly," said Tushin, "but still, to conceive a future life—"
He did not finish. Just then there was a whistle in the air, nearer and nearer, faster and louder, louder and faster, a cannonball. As if it had not finished saying what was necessary, thudded into the ground near the shed with superhuman force, throwing up a mass of earth. The ground seemed to groan at the terrible impact.
And immediately Tushin, with a short pipe in the corner of his mouth and his kind, intelligent face rather pale, rushed out of the shed, followed by the owner of the manly voice, a dashing infantry officer, who hurried off to his company, buttoning up his coat as he ran.
Chapter 17. Of course, again, Prince Andrew lingered with the battery, looking at the puff from the gun that had sent the ball. His eyes ran rapidly over the wide space, but he only saw that the hitherto motionless masses of the French now swayed, and that there really was a battery to their left.
What's a battery? In this context, obviously.
Yeah. I don't know that. The smoke above it had not yet dispersed. 2 mounted Frenchmen, probably adjutants, were galloping up the hill. A small but distinctly visible enemy column was moving down the hill, probably to strengthen the front line. The smoke of the first shot had not yet dispersed before another puff appeared, followed by a report. The battle had begun. Prince Andrew turned his horse and galloped back to Grunth to find Prince Bagration. He heard the cannonade behind him growing louder and more frequent. Evidently our guns had begun to reply. From the bottom of the slope, where the parleys had taken place, came the report of musketry.
Artillery battery, an organized group of artillery pieces. Battery position, a stage of operation of a firearm action. So it's, I guess, where like stuff is like a bunch of cannons or a bunch of like organized artillery weapons.
Yeah. So it's like a formation of weaponry.
Of machines.
Machinery. Yeah, okay.
Of death machinery. Sorry. Musketry? Yeah. Le Marois had just arrived at a gallop with Bonaparte's stern letter, and Murat, humiliated and anxious to expiate his fault, had at once moved his forces to attack the center and outflank both the Russian wings, hoping before evening and before the arrival of the Emperor to crush the contemptible detachment that stood before him.
It has begun. Here it is, thought Prince Andrew, feeling the blood rush to his heart. But where and how will my Toulon present itself?
Passing between the companies that had been eating porridge and drinking vodka a quarter of an hour before. See, I hope porridge is not sweet for their sake. Because that sounds disgusting.
Mixed with vodka?
Yes.
Herb vodka, too.
Vodka in general is horrendous. It's like drinking rubbing alcohol. Eating porridge and drinking vodka a quarter of an hour before, he saw everywhere the same rapid movement of soldiers forming ranks and getting their muskets ready, and on all their faces he recognized the same eagerness that filled his heart. It has begun, here it is, dreadful but enjoyable, was what the face of each soldier and each officer seemed to say.
Before he had reached the embankments that were being thrown up, he saw, in the light of the dull autumn evening, mounted men coming toward him. The foremost, wearing a Cossack cloak and lambskin cap and riding a white horse, was Prince Bagration. I really hope we're pronouncing it right.
I mean, I'm fairly sure we aren't. But
Prince Andrew stopped, waiting for him to come up. Prince Bagration reined in his horse and recognizing Prince Andrew, nodded to him. He still looked ahead while Prince Andrew told him what he had seen.
The feeling, it has begun, here it is, was seen, even on Prince Bagration's hard brown face with its half-closed, dull, sleepy eyes. Prince Andrew gazed with anxious curiosity at that impassive face and wished he could tell what, if anything, this man was thinking and feeling at that moment. Is there anything at all behind that impassive face? Prince Andrew asked himself as he looked. Isn't that a different way of saying the same thing? Okay. Prince Bagration bent his head in sign of agreement with what Prince Andrew had told him, and said, "Very good," in a tone that seemed to imply that everything that took place and was reported to him was exactly what he had foreseen. Prince Andrew, out of breath with his rapid ride, spoke quickly. Prince Bagration, uttering his words with an oriental accent, spoke particularly slowly, as if to impress the fact that there was no need to hurry. However, he put his horse to a trot in the direction of Tushin's battery. Prince Andrew followed with the suite. Behind Prince Bagration rode an officer of the suite, the prince's personal adjutant, Zhukov, an orderly officer, the staff officer on duty, riding a fine bobtailed horse, and a civilian, an accountant who had asked permission to be present at the battle out of curiosity. What? The accountant, a stout, full-faced man, looking around him with a naive smile of satisfaction, and presented a strange appearance among the hussars, Cossacks, and adjutants, in his camlet coat, as he jolted on his horse with a convoy officer.
Said Zhukov to Bolkonsky, the accountant. He feels a pain in the pit of his stomach already.
"Oh, leave off," said the accountant with a beaming but rather cunning smile, as if flattered at being made the subject of Zhukov's joke, and purposely trying to appear stupider than he really was.
It's very strange, mon monsieur Prince, said the staff officer. He remembered that in French there is some peculiar way of addressing a prince, but could not get it quite right.
Who can, my friend? By this time, they were all approaching Tushin's battery, and a ball struck the ground in front of them. Sorry, are cannonballs just balls?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this for a while ever since they met. I was like, what must it be like for suddenly a giant, heavy ball to just like...
I thought they were explosive. It's just a fucking ball?
Yeah, but it's like a really heavy ball that is like shooting at a very high speed.
Yeah, but it can only affect a restricted amount of space. The size of the ball. No matter how hard, it still is only getting...
it like hits, like it knocks people back or walls back or I don't know. They have explosives at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, it's not a bazooka.
Gunpowder and stuff.
Yeah.
That goes way back.
I know, but I don't know if they've like, do they have grenades?
I don't think so.
Like, I don't know if they have, because they light the, obviously they have like gunpowder. Don't actually know all the weapons they have. But anyway, I actually think the idea of like just a heavy ball coming at you at a very fast pace is extremely terrifying.
By the time it hit you, you'd be gone.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
So it's actually the best way to die. Is under a cannonball.
Cannonball. Oh.
Okay.
By this time, they were all approaching Tushin's, but no, wait. That a ball struck the ground in front of them. What's that has fallen? Asked the accountant with a naive smile.
A French pancake. Not sure it's Zukov.
So that's what they hit with? Asked the accountant. How awful.
He seemed to swell with satisfaction. He had hardly finished speaking when they again heard an unexpectedly violent whistling, which suddenly ended with a thud into something soft. Flop, and a Cossack riding a little to their right and behind the accountant crashed to earth with his horse. Zukov and the staff officer bent over their saddles and turned their horses away. The accountant stopped, facing the Cossack, and examined him with attentive curiosity. The Cossack was dead, but the horse still struggled.
Prince Bagration screwed up his eyes, looked around, and seeing the cause of the confusion, turned away with indifference. As if to say, is it worthwhile noticing trifles?
He reined in his seat. This is exactly what I mean. That's a trifle.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's just a... Okay. Sorry.
He reined in his horse with the care of a skillful rider, and slightly bending over, disengaged his saber, which had caught in his cloak. It was an old-fashioned saber of a kind no longer in general use. Prince Andrew remembered the story of Suvorov giving his saber to Bagration in Italy, and the recollection was particularly pleasant at that moment. They had reached the battery at which Prince Andrew had been when he examined the battlefield.
Whose company? Asked Prince Bagration of an artilleryman standing by the ammunition wagon.
He asked whose company, but he really meant, are you frightened here? And the artilleryman understood him.
Captain Tushin's, Your Excellency, shouted the fair-haired, freckled gunner in a merry voice, standing to attention.
Yes, yes, muttered Bagration, as if considering something, and he rode past the limbers to the furthest cannon.
As he approached, a ringing shot issued from it, deafening him and his suite, and in the smoke that suddenly surrounded the gun, they could see the gunners who had seized it, straining to roll it quickly back to its former position. A huge, broad-shouldered gunner, number 1, holding a mop, his legs far apart, sprang to the wheel, while number 2, with a trembling hand, placed a charge in the cannon's mouth. The short, round-shouldered Captain Tushin, stumbling over the tail of the gun carriage, moved forward and, not noticing the general, looked out, shading his eyes with his small hand.
Lift it 2 lines more, and it will be just right, cried he, in a feeble voice to which he tried to impart a dashing note, ill-suited to his weak figure. Number 2, he squeaked. Fire!
Bagration pulled his cap with a bashful and awkward gesture, not at all like a military salute, but like a priest's benediction, approached the general. Though Tushin's guns had been intended to cannonade the valley, he was firing incendiary balls at the village of Graben, visible just opposite, in front of which large masses of French were advancing.
No one had given Tushin orders where and at what to fire, but after consulting his sergeant major, Zarkachenko, for whom he had great respect, he had decided that it would be a very good thing to set fire to the village. Very good, said Bagration in reply to the officer's report, and began deliberately to examine the whole battlefield extended before him. The French had advanced nearest on our right. Below the height on which the Kiev regiment was stationed, in the hollow where the rivulet flowed, the soul-stirring rolling and crackling of musketry was heard. And much farther to the right, beyond the dragoons, the officer of the suite pointed out to Bagration a French column that was outflanking us. To the left, the horizon bounded by the adjacent wood. Prince Bagration ordered 2 battalions from the center to be sent to reinforce the right flank. The officer of the suite ventured to remark to the prince that if these battalions went away, the guns would remain without support. Prince Bagration turned to the officer and with his dull eyes looked at him in silence. It seemed to Prince Andrew that the officer's remark was just and that really no answer could be made to it. But if at that moment an adjutant galloped up with a message from the commander of the regiment in the hollow and news that immense masses of the French were coming down upon them, and that his regiment was in disorder and was retreating upon the Kiev grenadiers. Prince Bagration bowed his head in sign of assent and approval. He rode off at a walk to the right and sent an adjutant to the dragoons with orders to attack the French. But this adjutant returned half an hour later with the news that the commander of the dragoons had already retreated beyond the dip in the ground, as a heavy fire had been opened on him, and he was losing men uselessly, and so had hastened to throw some sharpshooters into the wood.
Very good, said Bagration.
As he was leaving the battery, firing was heard on the left also, and as it was too far to the left flank for him to have time to go there himself, Prince Bagration sent Zherkov to tell the general in command, the one who had paraded his regiment before Kutuzov at Braunau, that he must retreat as quickly as possible behind the hollow in the rear, as the right flank would probably not be able to withstand the enemy's attack very long. About Tushin and the battalion that had been in support of his battery, all was forgotten. Prince Andrew listened attentively to Bagration's colloquies with the commanding officers, and the orders he gave them, and, to his surprise, found that no orders were really given, but that Prince Bagration tried to make it appear that everything done by necessity, by accident, or by the will of subordinate commanders was done, if not by his direct command, at least in accord with his intentions. Prince Andrew noticed, however, that though what happened was due to chance and was independent of the commander's will, owing to the tact Bagration showed, his presence was very valuable. Officers who approached him with disturbed countenances became calm. Soldiers and officers greeted him gaily, grew more cheerful in his presence, and were evidently anxious to display their courage before him.
Chapter 18.
Weird chapter break. Yeah.
Previous one too. Yeah. Prince Bagration, having reached the highest point of our right flank, also it's weird that he randomly is like our flank, our this, our that every once in a while. It's not consistent at all.
I don't know. Not consistent.
Inconsistent. Having reached the highest point of our right flank, began riding downhill to where the roll of musketry was heard, but where, on account of the smoke, nothing could be seen. The nearer they got to the hollow, the less they could see, but the more they felt the nearness of the actual battlefield. They began to meet wounded men. One with a bleeding hand and no cap was being dragged along by 2 soldiers who supported him under the arms. There was a gurgle in his throat and he was spitting blood. A bullet had evidently hit him in the throat or mouth. Another was walking sturdily by himself, but without his musket, groaning aloud and swinging his arm which had just been hurt, while blood from it was streaming over his greatcoat, as from a bottle. He had that moment been wounded, and his face showed fear rather than suffering. Crossing a road, they descended a steep incline and saw several men lying on the ground. They also met a crowd of soldiers, some of whom were unwounded. The soldiers descended. Despite the general's presence, were talking loud and gesticulating. In front of them, rows of... Oh, sorry, my pages are changing without me wanting them to. In front of them, rows of grey cloaks were already visible through the smoke, and an officer catching sight of Bagration rushed, shouting after the crowd of retreating soldiers, ordering them back. Bagration rode up to the ranks, along which shots crackled now here and now there, drowning the sound of voices and the shouts of command. The whole air reeked of smoke. The excited faces of the soldiers were blackened with it. Some were using their ramrods, others putting powder on the touch pans or taking charges from their pouches, while others were firing, though who they were firing at could not be seen for the smoke, which there was no wind to carry away. A pleasant humming and whistling of bullets were often heard. What is this? Thought Prince Andrew, approaching the crowd of soldiers. It can't be an attack, for they are not moving. It can't be a square, for they are not drawn up for that.
The commander of the regiment, a thin, feeble-looking old man with a pleasant smile, his eyelids drooping more than half over his old eyes, giving him a mild expression, rode up to Bagration and welcomed him as a host welcomes an honored guest. He reported that his regiment had been attacked by French cavalry, and that, though the attack had been repulsed, he had lost more than half his men. He said the attack had been repulsed, employing this military term to describe what had occurred to his regiment, but in reality he did not himself know what had happened during that half hour to the troops entrusted to him, and could not say with certainty whether the attack had been repulsed or his regiment had been broken up. All he knew was that at the commencement of the action, balls and shells began flying all over his regiment and hitting men, and that afterwards someone had shouted, "Cavalry!" and our men had begun firing. They were still firing, not at the cavalry which had disappeared, but at French infantry who had come into the hollow and were firing at our men. Prince Bagration bowed his head as a sign that this was exactly what he had desired and expected. Turning to his adjutant, he ordered him to bring down the 2 battalions of the 6 chasseurs, whom they had just passed. Prince Andrew was struck by the changed expression on Prince Bagration's face at this moment. It expressed the concentrated and happy resolution you see on the face of a man who on a hot day takes a final run before plunging into the water. The dull, sleepy expression was no longer there, nor the affection of profound thought. The round, steady hawk's eyes looked before him eagerly and rather disdainfully, not resting on anything, although his movements were still slow and measured.
The commander of the regiment turned to Prince Bagration, entreating him to go back, as it was too dangerous to remain where they were. "Please, your excellency, for God's sake," he kept saying, glancing for support at an officer of the suite who turned away from him. "There, you see?" And he drew attention to the bullets whistling, singing, and hissing continually around them. He spoke in the tone of entreaty and reproach that a carpenter uses to a gentleman who has picked up an axe. "We are used to it, but you, sir, will blister your hands." He spoke as if those bullets could not kill him, and his half-closed eyes gave still more persuasiveness to his words. The staff officer joined in the colonel's appeals, but Bagration did not reply. He only gave an order to cease firing and reform, so as to give room for the 2 approaching battalions. While he was speaking, the curtain of smoke that had concealed the hollow, driven by a rising wind, began to move from right to left as if drawn by an invisible hand, and the hill opposite, with the French moving about on it, opened out before them. All eyes fastened involuntarily on this French column advancing against them and winding down over the uneven ground. One could already see the soldiers' shaggy caps distinguish the officers from the men and see the standard flapping against its staff.
"They march splendidly," remarked someone in Bagration's suite.
Too soon. Too soon, someone.
Someone.
The head of the column had already descended into the hollow. The clash would take place on the side of it.
The remains of our regiment had been in action rapidly formed up and moved to the right. From behind it, dispersing the laggards, came 2 battalions of the 6 chasseurs in fine order. Before they had reached Bagration, the weighty tread of the mass of men marching in step could be heard. On their left flank, nearest to Bagration, marched a company commander, a fine, round-faced man with a stupid and happy expression, same man who had rushed out of the wattle shed. At that moment, he was clearly thinking of nothing but how dashing a fellow he would appear as he passed the commander.
Whoops.
Keep reading. What am I? The self-satisfaction of a man operator.
What? Where is it? With the self-satisfaction of a man on parade, he stepped lightly with his muscular legs as if sailing along, stretching himself to his full height without the smallest effort, his ease contrasting with the heavy tread of the soldiers who were keeping step with him. He carried close to his leg a narrow, unsheathed sword, small, curved, and not like a real weapon, and looked now at the superior officers and now back at the men without losing step, his whole powerful body turning flexibly. It was as if all the powers of his soul were concentrated on passing the commander in the best possible manner, and feeling that he was doing it well, he was happy. Left, 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 he seemed to repeat to himself at each alternate step. And in time to this, with stern but varied faces, the wall of soldiers burdened with knapsacks and muskets marched in step, and each one of these hundreds of soldiers seemed to be repeating to himself at each alternate step, left, left, left. A fat major skirted a bush, puffing and falling out of step. A soldier who had fallen behind, his face showing alarm at his defection, ran at a trot, panting to catch up with his company. A cannonball, cleaving the air, flew over the heads of Bagration and his suite and fell into the column to the measure of left, left, close up, came the company commander's voice in jaunty tones. The soldiers passed in a semicircle round something where the ball had fallen, and an old trooper on the flank, a non-commissioned officer who had stopped beside the dead men, ran to catch up his line and, falling into step with a hop, looked back angrily, and through the ominous silence and the regular tramp of feet beating the ground in unison, one seemed to hear left, left, left.
Well done, lads, said Prince Bagration.
Glad to do our best, Your Excellency, came a confused shout from the ranks. A morose soldier marching on the left turned his eyes to Bagration as he shouted with an expression that seemed to say, "We know that ourselves!" Another, without looking round, as though fearing to relax, shouted with his mouth wide open and passed on.
What? Ah! Is that what happened? Cool. The order was given to... Yeah. The order was given to halt and down knapsacks.
Bagration rode round the ranks that had rode round the ranks. It took me forever to find where you were referring to because I was looking for a paragraph that ended with what you were saying.
Oh.
Looks like my Kindle is forsaken me. I don't know where I am. Bagration rode round the ranks that had marched past him and dismounted. He gave the reins to a Cossack, took over and handed over his felt coat, stretched his legs and set his cap straight. The head of the French column, with its officers leading, appeared from below the hill.
Forward with God, said Bagration in a resolute, sonorous voice, turning for a moment to the front line and slightly swinging his arms. He went forward uneasily over the rough field with the awkward gait of a cavalryman. Prince Andrew felt that an invisible power was leading him forward and experienced great happiness.
The French were already near. Prince Andrew walking this... I have no idea what's going on. Just that they're, warring.
They're warring. Yeah, and apparently he's keeping it all together.
Bagration. Yeah, because he's like the glue. He's like, once more into the breach, dear friends.
Yeah, it kind of seems like no matter what's happening, he's like, great, good.
Yes.
Yes, and they're like, oh, good, okay, all right.
Yeah, cool. I feel like the last 3 chapters could be reduced to the simple phrase, they warred.
They warred. Probably.
Cool. We're obviously the right audience for this book.
You might he has to know, presumably, what's going on.
Yeah.
Presumably. Yeah. And just be like, chaos over here on the left flank. Left, 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 left. There's a cavalry guy. He opens his mouth. We don't know why. He yells. Prince Bagration looks great. Prince Andrew feels happy.
He is bouncing right back.
Prince Andrew. He can do anything.
He can.
You know what he's got? He's got grit.
Chutzpah. Yeah. Same thing, I think.
Yeah.
Grut. Grut. Where are we?
The French were already near. That's at the beginning of the paragraph.
Something, the French were already near. The French were already near. Prince Andrew, walking beside Bagration, could clearly distinguish their bandoliers, red epaulets, and even their faces. He distinctly saw an old French officer who, with gaitered legs and turned-out toes, climbed the hill with difficulty. Prince Bagration gave no further orders and silently continued to walk on in front of the ranks. Suddenly, one shot after another rang out from the French. Smoke appeared all along their uneven ranks, and musket shots sounded. Several of our men fell, among them the round-faced officers who had marched so gaily and Several of our men fell, among them the round-faced officer who had marched so gaily and complacently. But at the moment the first report was heard, Bagration looked around and shouted, "Hurrah!
Hurrah! Ah! Ah!" Rang a long-drawn shout from our ranks. And passing Bagration and racing one another, they rushed in an irregular but joyous and eager crowd down the hill at their disordered foe.
Suddenly they're disordered.
Suddenly.
The French became disordered suddenly.
Yeah, they're I don't know.
The subtitle of this book should be Irregular but Joyous.
Irregular but joyous.
Chapter 19. The attack of the 6th Chasseurs secured the retreat of our right flank. In the center, Tushen's forgotten battery, which...
Sorry, I just wanted to look up this guy.
Bagration. How do you pronounce
that? He kind of looks how I thought he would look.
Let's see.
But that's what I wanted to know. I actually just wanted to know how to pronounce it.
Of course.
Then I don't know how to read these things. Bagration. I think we're maybe doing it correct.
Bagration.
No. Where'd you get that? It's those phonetics. Oh, it is. Bagration.
Bagration.
This says Bagration.
Bagrazioni.
Like, that's why I was like, oh, I think it's right, because if you separate T on. Bagration. In English, we're not dealing with this.
Oh,
we're going to commit
what have we
to
committed
the pronunciation that we have chosen, which is Bagration. Peter Bagration.
But he's Russian.
I don't want to give it away, but I know when he dies.
What?
Anyway, he was a real dude. Real dude.
Aren't most of these people real dudes?
Probably. Prince Andrew, you think?
Andy Pooh?
I want Dolokhov to come back.
Oh, of course he's coming back.
I'm in love with him.
He's belligerent.
He's in love with me too, he just doesn't know it.
He's belligerent as F.
Oh my gosh.
He's like shouting at the French. What is he doing right now?
Just like being bad.
He's a rebel with 0 cause. Okay. In the center, Tushen's forgotten battery, which had managed to set fire to the strong rubber.
Where are you?
Great question. It's a good question.
Chapter 19?
Yeah.
Beginning of it?
Yeah, delayed the French advance. Yeah. Delayed the French advance.
Oh, have we already started?
Yeah, because I started reading when you were looking up.
Continue.
Bagration.
Okay.
What did you commit to?
Bagration.
Bagration. Ratty. I'll call him Ratty.
Bagration. Or just call him
Ratty.
Ratty, sure. His name's Peter. We call him Peter too.
Piotrati.
Continue.
The French were putting out the fire which the wind was spreading, and thus gave us time to retreat. Who's us?
Us, the Russians.
It's so weird. The retirement of the center to the other side of the dip in the ground at the rear was hurried and noisy, but the different companies did not get mixed. But our left, which consisted of the Azov and Podolsk infantry and the Pavlograd Hussars, Hussar is 1,000 in Hindi. So it's really weird, but it's the thousands.
It's
and the Pavlograd thousands.
Interesting.
Was simultaneously attacked and outflanked by superior French forces under Lannes, and was thrown into confusion. Bagration had sent Zherkov to the general commanding that left. Okay, I can't speak English. He had sent Zherkov to the general commanding that left flank with orders to retreat immediately.
Zherkov, not removing his hand from his cap, turned his horse about, I can't either, and galloped off. But no sooner had he left Bagration than his courage failed him. He was seized by panic and could not go where it was dangerous.
Having what? He just had a panic attack?
He's just like, I can't.
I can't do it. I can't. Having reached the left flank, instead of going to the front where the firing was, he began to look for the general and his staff where they could possibly be, and so did not deliver the order. What happened to Zherkov suddenly?
No, he got the nerves. The command of the left flank belonged by seniority to the commander of the regiment Kutuzov, had reviewed at Braunau, and in which Dolokhov was serving as a private. But the command of the extreme left flank had been assigned to the commander of the Pavlograd regiment in which Rostov was serving, and a misunderstanding arose.
Is there a misunderstanding between who Rostov is and who... Is that the misunderstanding?
Yeah, they're just like, wait, who's this guy again? No, it's this person. No, it's no. The two commanders were much exasperated with one another, and long after the action had begun on the right flank, and the French were already advancing, were engaged in discussion with the sole object of offending one another. But the regiments, both cavalry and infantry, were by no means ready for the impending action. From privates to general, they were not expecting a battle, and were engaged in peaceful occupations, the cavalry feeding the horses, and the infantry collecting wood.
How far away are these people from the others?
I don't know.
What do you mean they didn't
Why
expect
are they collecting wood?
Because they didn't expect a fight.
But they're like, there's like a battle. Their men are going down, and they're like, oh.
Well, what I'm saying is I think that these people are maybe not in the same place.
They're actually just not seeing. Okay, sure. Maybe, yeah, and it's describing them.
What?
So they're in a completely different place.
Perhaps, because, I mean, otherwise, why would they not be not expecting battle? Like, why would they be?
You would think that you could see, like, smoke.
Yeah. Smoke rising from Mordor.
Let's continue.
He higher is than I in rank, said the German. That doesn't sound like German.
He higher is than I in rank. Yeah.
Said the journal. The German colonel got capsized into journal.
Said the journal.
Said the German colonel of the Hussars, flushing and addressing an adjutant who had ridden up. So let him do what he will, but I cannot sacrifice my Hussars. What?
Sound the retreat. I know there's war.
No, the adjutant had just ridden up.
Yeah.
So that's like the people letting them know what's happening.
But it doesn't say the adjutant said anything.
Yeah, it skips that bit.
Maybe. I don't know. But haste was becoming imperative. Cannon and musketry, mingling together, thundered on the right and in the center, while the capotes of Lannes sharpshooters were already seen crossing the mill dam and forming up within twice the range of a musket shot. The general in command of the infantry went toward his horse with jerky steps, and having mounted, drew himself up very straight and tall, and rode to the Pavlograd commander. The commanders met with polite bows, but with secret malevolence in their hearts.
Oh. Once again, Colonel, said the general, I can't leave half my men in the wood. I beg of you, he repeated, to occupy the position and prepare for an attack.
I beg of you yourself not to mix in what is not your business, suddenly replied the irate colonel. If you were in the cavalry...
I am not in the cavalry, Colonel, but I am a Russian general, and if you were not aware of the fact...
Quite unfair, your excellency, replied, shouting the colonel, touching his horse and turning purple in the face. Will you be so good to come in the front and see that this position is not good? I don't wish to destroy my men for your pleasure.
You forget yourself, Colonel. I am not considering my own pleasure, and I won't allow it to be said.
Taking the colonel's outburst as a challenge to his courage, the general expanded his chest and rode, frowning, beside him to the front line, as if their differences would be settled here amongst the bullets. They reached the front, several bullets sped over them, and they halted in silence. There was nothing fresh to be seen from the line, for from where they had been before, it had been evident that it was impossible for cavalry to act among the bushes and broken ground, as well as that the French were outflanking our left. The general and colonel looked sternly and significantly at one another, like two fighting cocks preparing for battle, each vainly trying to detect signs of cowardice in the other. Both passed the examination successfully.
Cool.
As there was nothing to be said, and neither wished to give occasion for it to be alleged that he had been the first to leave the range of fire, they would have remained there for a long time testing each other's courage, had it not been that just then they heard the rattle of musketry and a muffled shout almost behind them in the wood. The French had attacked the men collecting wood in the copse. It was no longer possible for the hussars to retreat with the infantry. They were cut off from the line of retreat on the left by the French. However inconvenient the position, it was now necessary to attack in order to cut a way through for themselves.
The squadron in which Rostov was serving had scarcely time to mount before it was halted facing the enemy. Again, as at the Enns Bridge, there was nothing between the squadron and the enemy, and again that terrible dividing line of uncertainty and fear, resembling the line separating the living from the dead, lay between them. All were conscious of this unseen line, and the question whether they would cross it or not, and how they would cross it, agitated them all.
The colonel rode to the front, angrily gave some reply to questions put to him by the officers, and like a man desperately insisting on having his own way, gave an order. No one said anything definite, but the rumor of an attack spread through the squadron. The command to form up rang out, and the sabers whizzed as they were drawn from their scabbards. Still no one moved. The troops of the left flank, infantry and hussars alike, felt that the commander did not himself know what to do, and this irresolution communicated itself to the men.
If only they would be quick, thought Rostov, feeling that at last the time had come to experience the joy of an attack of which he had so often heard from his fellow hussars.
Forward, with God, lads! Rang out, you can't pronounce ours, Denisov's voice. À la droite, forward!
The horse's crew began to... What's crew?
Croups. I don't know, but I know the word somehow. I wish I had this little dictionary.
I think you do too.
Do what?
You just have to hold it down on the wood.
Do what? Do what? Look up. The rump or hindquarters.
Okay.
Cool.
The horse's crew began to sign. Rook pulled it and started off his own accord. Whoa, Rook!
Before him, on the right, Rostov saw the front lines of his hussars, and still farther ahead, a dark line which he could not see distinctly but took to be the enemy. Shots could be heard, but some way off.
Faster came the word of command, and Rostov felt Rook's flanks drooping as he broke into a gallop.
Rostov anticipated his horse's movements and became more and more elated. He had noticed a solitary tree ahead of him. This tree had been in the middle of the line that had seemed so terrible, and now he had crossed that line. And not only was there nothing terrible, but everything was becoming more and more happy and animated. Oh, how I will slash at him, thought Rostov, gripping the hilt of his saber.
These people are dongles. Just arriving at a gallop.
Slash.
Just arriving at a gallop, and he's like, yes! Based on what?
I'm into this. I'm like, what else can I look up? Sorry.
Hurrah! Came a roar of voices. Let anyone come my way now, thought Rostov, driving his spurs into Rook and letting him go at a full gallop so that he outstripped the others. Ahead, the enemy was already visible. Suddenly, something like a birch broom seemed to sweep over the squadron. Rostov raised his saber, ready to strike, but at that instant, the trooper, Nikitenko, what a cute name, who was galloping ahead, shot away from him, and Rostov felt as in a dream that he continued to be carried forward with unnatural speed, but yet stayed on the same spot. From behind him, Bondarchuk, an hussar he knew, jolted against him and looked angrily at him. Bondarchuk's horse swerved and galloped past.
How is it I am not moving? I have fallen. I am killed, Rostov asked, and answered at the same instant. He was alone in the middle of a field. Instead of the moving horses and hussars' backs, he saw nothing before him but the motionless earth and the stubble around him. There was warm blood under his arm. No, I am wounded, and the horse is killed. Rook tried to rise on his forelegs, but fell back, pinning his rider's leg. Blood was flowing from his head. He struggled up, but could not rise. Rostov also tried to rise, but fell back, his sabretache having become entangled in the saddle. Where our men were, and where the French, he did not know. There was no one near.
Having disentangled his leg, he rose. Where, on which side was now the line that had so sharply divided the two armies? He asked himself and could not answer. Can something bad have happened to me? He wondered as he got up, and at that moment he felt that something superfluous was hanging on his benumbed left arm. The wrist felt as if it were not his. He examined his hand carefully, vainly trying to find blood on it. Ah, here, people are coming. Here are people coming, he thought joyfully, seeing some men running towards him. They will help me. I feel it is not going to go well. No. In front came a man wearing a strange shako and a blue cloak, swarthy, sunburned, and with a hooked nose. Then came two more, and many more, running behind. One of them said something strange, not in Russian. In among the hindmost of these men, wearing similar shakos, was a Russian hussar. He was being held by the arms, and his horse was being led behind him. It must be one of ours, a prisoner. Yes. Can it be that they will take me too? Who are these men, thought Rostov, scarcely believing his eyes. Can they be French? He looked at the approaching Frenchmen, and though but a moment before he had been galloping to get at them and hack them to pieces, their proximity now seemed so awful that he could not believe his eyes. Who are they? Why are they running? Can they be coming at me, and why? To kill me? Me, whom everyone is so fond of? He remembered his mother's love for him, and his family's and his friends, and the enemy's intention to kill him seemed impossible. But perhaps they may do it. For more than 10 seconds he stood, not moving from the spot or realizing the situation. The foremost Frenchman, the one with the hooked nose, was already so close that the expression of his face could be seen, and the excited alien face of that man, his bayonet hanging down, holding his breath and running so lightly, frightened Rostov. He seized his pistol, and instead of firing it, flung it at the Frenchman and ran with all his might towards the bushes.
Wait, is Rostov Nicholas?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, no. He did not now run with the feeling of doubt and conflict with which he had trotted the Enns Bridge, with the feeling of a hare fleeing from the hounds.
Can I just say, what is wrong with these people? How is he just realizing?
Like, oh, this is scary.
He's like, wait, how have you not thought of this?
Believe one of those things. It's that like it's not, you don't think of it until you're in the moment. And then it's so strange. I think there's something about that description that actually, I mean, it's crazy that his mind is like, but I'm well loved. But if suddenly like people were coming at me, wanting to kill me, that would be very surreal.
I agree, but how is this the first he's considering it? That's the part. Like, if he, like, us sitting here is not exactly the same as us advancing on the French army. If we were advancing on the French army, I would have, like, thought about this a little bit.
If I'm advancing on them, they could advance on me too.
Right. The whole thing is like, which is why it seems like they're so led by their emotions, frankly, where it's like, the horse picks up speed and he's like, yes! But like, what?
I think that's really good that you say they're so led by their emotions, which I find very surprising. I don't know why I thought that like Russians were perhaps very like in control of themselves.
I don't think I thought that, but I don't know what I thought. I don't think they're intense.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just seems like a small child, and maybe he is a child, but
I don't know how old he is. Plus, very privileged, very sheltered. Saying that, but I'm like, is that true? I don't really know what their upbringing was.
No, they are.
Yeah.
Is that reading?
Bushes,
I think I was.
Yeah.
He did not now run with the feeling of doubt and conflict with which he had trodden the Enns bridge, but with the feeling of a hare fully. Wait.
Okay. I don't know. I'll continue. One single sentiment, that of fear for his young and happy life, possessed his whole being. Rapidly leaping the furrows, he fled across the field with the impetuosity he used to show at catch play, now and then turning his good-natured, pale young face to look back. A shudder of terror went through him. No, better not look, he thought, but having reached the bushes he glanced round once more. The French had fallen behind, and just as he looked round, the first man changed his run to a walk, and, turning, shouted something loudly to a comrade farther back. Rostov paused. No, there's some mistake, thought he. They can't have wanted to kill me. But at the same time, his left arm felt as heavy as if a 70-pound weight were tied to it. He could run no more. The Frenchman also stopped and took aim. Rostov closed his eyes and stooped down. One bullet and then another whistled past him. He mustered his last remaining strength, took hold of his left hand with his right, and reached the bushes. Bushes? Suddenly that word didn't look like a word. Behind these were some Russian sharpshooters. Ooh. Wait, Rostov might live? I thought for sure.
There's not live.
Okay. Bushes.
That's so funny.
Literally, I was like, that's a typo.
Typo. I love brains. Every single time I see the word AWRY written, I'm like, Ori. What's Ori? Every single time.
No matter how many times you see it?
Yeah, the word. It's kind of like what just happened with bushes. It's just like doesn't fucking compute.
Yeah.
Ori. 20. The infantry regiments that had been caught unawares in the outskirts of the rat. Which ones? Okay. The different companies getting mixed and retreated as a disorderly crowd. One soldier, in his fear, uttered the senseless cry, "Cut off!" that is so terrible in battle, and that word infected the whole crowd with a feeling of panic. Surrounded, "Cut off! We're lost!" shouted the fugitives.
The moment he heard the firing and the cry from behind, the general realized that something dreadful had happened to his regiment, and the thought that he, an exemplary officer of many years of service, who had never been to blame, might be held responsible at headquarters for negligence or inefficiency, so staggered him that, forgetting the recalcitrant cavalry colonel, his own dignity as a general, and above all, quite forgetting the danger in all regard for self-preservation, he clutched the crupper of his saddle and, spurring his horse, galloped to the regiment under a hail of bullets, which fell around, but fortunately missed him. His one desire was to know what had happened and at any cost correct or remedy the mistake if he had made one, so that he, an exemplary officer of 22 years' service, who had never been censured, should not be held to blame. Cool.
What was happening? His desire was to know what was happening.
Yeah.
You said what had happened. So it's helpful to know that he also doesn't know what's going on, but it's an ongoing situation.
Yeah.
Having galloped safely through the French, he reached a field behind the copse across which our men, regardless of orders, were running and descending the valley. That moment of moral hesitation which decides the fate of battles had arrived. Would this disorderly crowd of soldiers attend to the voice of their commander, or would they, disregarding him, continue their flight? Despite his desperate shouts that used to seem so terrible to the soldiers, despite his furious purple countenance, is it night or day?
Day.
It is?
I think so.
Despite his desperate shouts that used to seem so terrible to the soldiers, despite his furious purple countenance distorted out of all likeness to his former self, and the flourishing of his saber, the soldiers all continued to run, talking, firing into the air, and disobeying orders. The moral hesitation with which decided the fate of battles was evidently culminating in a panic.
The general had a fit of coughing as a result of shouting, and of the powder smoke, and stopped in despair. Everything seemed lost, but at that moment the French who were attacking, suddenly and without any apparent reason, ran back, and disappeared from the outskirts, and Russian sharpshooters showed themselves in the copse. It was Timokhin's company, which alone had maintained its order in the wood, and, having lain in ambush in a ditch, now attacked the French unexpectedly. Timokhin, armed only with a sword, had rushed at the enemy with such a desperate cry and such mad, drunken determination that, taken by surprise, the French had thrown down their muskets and run. Dólokhov, running beside Timokhin, killed a Frenchman at close quarters and was the first to seize the surrendering French officer by his collar. Our fugitives returned, the battalions reformed, and the French, who had nearly cut our left flank in half, were for the moment repulsed. Our reserve units were able to join up, and the fight was at an end. The regimental commander and Major Ekonomov had stopped beside a bridge, letting the retreating companies pass by them, when a soldier came up and took hold of the commander's stirrup, almost leaning against him. The man was wearing a bluish coat of broadcloth. He had no knapsack or cap. His head was bandaged, and over his shoulder a French munition pouch was slung. He had an officer's sword in his hand. The soldier was pale, his blue eyes looked impudently into the commander's face, and his lips were smiling. Though the commander was occupied in giving instructions to Major Ekonomov, he could not help. Why is that funny?
Because it's like economics.
Economics. Major economics. He could not help taking notice of the soldier.
Your Excellency, here are 2 trophies, said Dólokhov, pointing to the French sword and pouch. I have taken an officer prisoner. I stopped the company. Dólokhov breathed heavily from weariness and spoke in abrupt sentences. The whole company can bear witness. I beg you will remember this, Your Excellency. Everyone is so about their own.
Like, I did this. You will remember.
When, everybody?
Well, Dólokhov.
All right, replied the commander, and turned to Major Ekonomov.
But Dólokhov did not go away. He untied the handkerchief round his head.
I remained at the front. Remember, Your Excellency.
Tushin's battery had been forgotten, and only at the very end of the action did Prince Bagration, still hearing the cannonade in the center, send his orderly staff officer, and later Prince Andrew also, to order the battery to retire as quickly as possible. When the supports attached to Tushin's battery had been... Tushin? This is a Bush situation again.
Bushes.
In the middle of the action by someone's order, the battery had continued firing and was not only captured and was only not captured by the French because the enemy could not surmise that anyone could have the effrontery to continue firing from 4 quite undefended guns. On the contrary, the energetic action of that battery led the French to suppose that here, in the center, the main Russian forces were concentrated. Twice they had attempted to attack this point, but on each occasion had been driven back by grape shot from the 4 isolated guns on the hillock.
The blanket's like on the water in a way that makes me feel like it's gonna knock over. There we go. Soon after Prince Bagration had left him, Tushin had succeeded in setting fire to Schöngrabern.
Look at them scurrying. It's burning. Just see the smoke. Fine. Grand. Look at the smoke. The smoke. Exclaimed the artillerymen, brightening up.
All the guns.
They're so quick to be like, yeah.
I know.
Look at that smoke.
That's what I mean. It's like so emotional. And like they're just like whatever feels good. This feels right. All the guns, without waiting for orders, were being fired in the direction of the conflagration. As if urging each other on, the soldiers cried at each shot, "Fine, that's good, look at it, grand!" The fire, fanned by the breeze, was rapidly spreading. The French columns that had advanced beyond the village went back, but as though in revenge for this failure, the enemy placed 10 guns to the right of the village and began firing them at Tushin's battery.
In their childlike glee, aroused by the fire and their luck in successfully cannonading the French, our artillerymen only noticed this battery when 2 balls and then 4 more fell among our guns, one knocking over 2 horses and another tearing off a munition wagon driver's leg.
Ugh!
Oof. Their spirits, once roused, were, however, not diminished, but only changed character. The horses were replaced by others from a reserve gun carriage, the wounded were carried away, and the 4 guns were turned against the 10-gun battery. Tushin's companion officer had been killed at the beginning of the engagement, and within an hour, 17 of the 40 men of the gun's crews had been disabled, but the artillerymen were still as merry and lively as ever. Twice they noticed the French appearing below them, and then they fired grape shot at them.
Little Tushin, moving feebly and awkwardly, kept telling his orderly to refill my pipe for that one. And then, scattering sparks from it, ran forward, shading his eyes with his small hand to look at the French.
"Smack at 'em, lads," he kept saying, seizing the guns by the wheels and working the screws himself.
Amid the smoke, deafened by the incessant reports which always made him jump, Tushin, not taking his pipe from his mouth, ran from gun to gun, now aiming, now counting the charges, now giving orders about replacing dead or wounded horses and harnessing French ones. French ones! Where are the French horses?
I only ride a French horse.
And shouting in his feeble voice, so high-pitched and irresolute. His face grew more and more animated. Only when a man was killed or wounded did he frown and turn away from the sight, shouting angrily at the men who, as is always the case, hesitated about lifting the injured or dead. The soldiers, for the most part handsome fellows, and as is always the case in an artillery company, a head and shoulders taller and twice as broad as their officer, all looked at their commander like children in an embarrassing situation, and the expression on his face was invariably reflected on theirs.
Owing to the terrible uproar and the necessity for concentration and activity, Tushin did not experience the slightest unpleasant sense of fear, and the thought that he might be killed or badly wounded never occurred to him. On the contrary, he became more and more elated. It seemed to him that it was a very long time ago, almost a day, since he had first seen the enemy and fired the first shot, and that the corner of the field he stood on was well-known and familiar ground. Though he thought of everything, considered everything, and did everything the best of officers could do in his position, he was in a state
guns around him, the whistle and thud of the enemy's cannonballs, from the flushed and perspiring faces of the crew bustling round the guns, from the sight of the blood of men and horses, from the little puffs of smoke on the enemy's side, always followed by a ball flying past and striking the earth. A man, a gun, a horse. From the sight of all these things, a fantastic world of his own had taken possession of his brain, and at that moment afforded him pleasure. The enemy's guns were, in his fancy, not guns, but pipes, from which occasional puffs were blown by an invisible smoker.
There, he's puffing again, muttered Tushin to himself, as a small cloud rose from the hill and was borne in the street to the left by the wind.
Now look out for the ball, we'll throw it back.
What do you want, Your Honor? Asked an artilleryman standing close by, who heard him muttering.
Nothing, only a shell, he answered.
Come along, I'm Matvevna, he said to himself. Matvevna, daughter of Matthew. Okay, thank you. It's helpful. Was the name his fancy gave to the farthest gun of the battery, which was large and of an old pattern. The French swarming round their guns seemed to him like ants. In that world, the handsome drunkard number 1 of the second gun's crew was Uncle. Tushin looked at him more often than at anyone else and took delight in his every movement. The sound of musketry at the foot of the hill, now diminishing, now increasing, seemed like someone's breathing. He listened intently to the ebb and flow of these sounds.
Ah, breathing again, breathing, he muttered to himself.
He imagined himself as an enormously tall, powerful man who was throwing cannonballs at the French with both hands.
Now then, Matvevna, dear old lady, don't let me down, he was saying as he moved from the gun, when a strange, unfamiliar voice called above his head, Captain Tushin, Captain!
Tushin turned round in dismay. It was the staff officer who had turned him out of the booth at Grunt. He was shouting in a gasping voice.
Are you mad? You have twice been ordered to retreat, and you...
Why are they down on me? Thought Tushin, looking in alarm at his superior.
I don't, he muttered, holding up 2 fingers to his cap.
But the staff officer did not finish what he wanted to say. A cannonball, flying close to him, caused him to duck and bend over his horse. He paused, and just as he was about to say something more, another ball stopped him. He turned his horse and galloped off.
Retire! All to retire! He shouted from a distance.
The soldiers laughed. A moment later, an adjutant arrived with the same order.
It was Prince Andrew. The first thing he saw on riding up to the space where Tushin's guns were stationed was an unharnessed horse with a broken leg that lay screaming piteously beside the harnessed horses. Blood was gushing from its leg as from a spring. Among the limbers lay several dead men. One ball after another passed over as he approached, and he felt a nervous shudder run down his spine. But the mere thought of being afraid roused him again. I cannot be afraid, thought he, and dismounted slowly among the guns. He delivered the order and did not leave the battery. He decided to have the guns removed from their positions and withdrawn in his presence. Together with Tushin, stepping across the bodies and under a terrible fire from the French, he attended to the removal of the guns.
A staff officer was here a minute ago, but skipped off, said an artilleryman to Prince Andrew. Not like Your Honor.
Prince Andrew said nothing to Tushin. They were both so busy as to seem not to notice one another. When having limbered up the only 2 cannon that remained, uninjured out of the 4, they began moving down the hill. 1 shattered gun and 1 unicorn were left behind. Prince Andrew rode up to Tushin.
Well, till we meet again, he said, holding out his hand to Tushin.
Goodbye, my dear fellow, said Tushin. Dear soul, goodbye, my dear fellow. And for some unknown reason, tears suddenly filled his eyes. Oh, Tushin.
Tushin. Goodbye.
Poor thing.
Chapter 21. They must be quite crazed, you know?
I mean, Tushin clearly is.
No, but like, I don't, like, it kind of makes sense, the state he's in. I had a ton of adrenaline. What?
Yeah.
Chapter 21. The wind had fallen, and black clouds, merging with the powder smoke, hung low over the field of battle on the horizon. It was growing dark, and the glow of 2 conflagrations, was the more conspicuous. The cannonade was dying down, but the battle of musketry behind on the right sounded on wounded men, was out of range of fire and descended into the dead. He was met by some of the staff, among them the staff officer and Zurkov, who had been twice sent to Tushin's battery but had never reached it. Interrupting one another, they all gave and transmitted orders as to how to proceed, reprimanding and reproaching him. Tushin gave no orders and, silently, fearing to speak because at every word he felt ready to weep without knowing why, rode behind on his artillery nag. Though the orders were to abandon the wounded, men of them dragged themselves after troops and begged for seats on the gun carriages. The jaunty infantry officer, who just before the battle had rushed out of Tushin's wattle shed, was laid, with a bullet in his stomach, on Matveyevna's carriage. At the foot of the hill, a pale hussar cadet, supporting one hand with the other, came up to Tushin and asked for a seat.
"Captain, for God's sake, I've hurt my arm," he said timidly. "For God's sake, I can't walk, for God's sake."
It was plain that this cadet had already repeatedly asked for a lift and been refused. He asked in a hesitating, piteous voice.
"Tell them to give me a seat, for God's sake."
"Give him a seat," said Tushin. "Lay a cloak for him to sit on, lad," he said, addressing his favorite soldier. "And where's the wounded officer?"
"He has been set down." "He died," replied someone.
"Help him up. Sit down, dear fellow, sit down. Spread out the cloak, Antonov."
The cadet was Rostov. With one hand he supported the other. He was pale and his jaw trembled, shivering feverishly. He was placed on Matveyevna, the gun from which they had removed the dead officer. The cloak they spread under him was wet with blood, which stained his breeches and arm.
"What are you wounded, my lad?" said Tushin, approaching the gun on which Rostov sat.
"No, it's a sprain."
"Then what is this blood on the gun carriage?" inquired Tushin.
"It was the officer, Your Honor, stained it," answered the artilleryman, wiping away the blood with his coat sleeve, as if apologizing for the state of his gun.
It was all that they could do to get the guns up the rise, aided by the infantry, and having reached the village of Gruntersdorf, they halted. It had grown so dark that one could not distinguish the uniforms 10 paces off, and the firing had begun to subside. Suddenly, nearby on the right, shouting and firing were again heard. Flashes of shot gleamed in the darkness. This was the last French attack, and was met by soldiers who had sheltered in the village houses. They all rushed out of the village again, but Tushin's guns could not move, and the artillerymen, Tushin and the cadet, exchanged silent glances as they awaited their fate. The firing died down, and soldiers, talking eagerly, streamed out of a side street.
"Not hurt, Petrov?" asked one.
"We've given it 'em hot, mate. They won't make another push now," said another.
"You couldn't see a thing. How they shot at their own fellows. Nothing could be seen. Pitch dark, brother. Isn't there something to drink?"
The French had been repulsed for the last time, and again in the complete darkness, Tushin's guns moved forward, surrounded by the humming infantry as by a frame.
In the darkness, it seemed as though a gloomy, unseen river was flowing always in one direction, humming with whispers and talk and the sound of hoofs and hoofs and wheels. Amid the general rumble, the groans and voices of the wounded were more distinctly heard than any other sound in the darkness of the night. The gloom that enveloped the army was filled with their groans, which seemed to melt into one with the darkness of the night. After a while, the moving mass became agitated. Someone rode past on a white horse, followed by his suite, and said something in passing. "What did he say? Where to now? Halt, is it? Did he thank us?" came eager questions from all sides. The whole moving mass began pressing closer together, and a report spread that they were ordered to halt. Evidently those in front had halted. All remained where they were, in the middle of the muddy road.
Fires were lighted, and the talk became more audible. Captain Tushin, having given orders to his company, sent a soldier to find a dressing station or a doctor for the cadet, and sat down by a bonfire the soldiers had kindled on the road. Rostov, too, dragged himself to the fire. From pain, cold, and damp, a feverish shivering shook his whole body. Drowsiness was irresistibly mastering him, but he kept awake by an excruciating pain in his arm, for which he could find no satisfactory position. He kept closing his eyes and then again looking at the fire, which seemed to him dazzlingly red, and at the feeble, round-shouldered figure of Tushin, who was sitting cross-legged like a Turk. Two large intelligent eyes were fixed with commiseration on Rostov, who saw that Tushin with his whole heart wished to help him, but could not.
From all sides were heard the footsteps and talk of the infantry, who were walking, driving past, and settling down all around. The sound of voices, the tramping feet, the horses' hoofs moving in mud, the crackling of wood fires near and afar merged into one tremulous rumble.
It was no longer, as before, a dark, unseen river flowing through the gloom, but a dark sea swelling and gradually subsiding after a storm. Rostov looked at and listened listlessly to what passed before and around him. An infantryman came to the fire, squatted on his heels, held his hands to the blaze, and turned away his face.
"You don't mind, Your Honor?" he asked Tushin. "I've lost my company, Your Honor. I don't know where. Such bad luck."
With a soldier, an infantry officer with a bandaged cheek came up to the bonfire, and addressing Tushin asked him to have the guns moved a trifle, to let a wagon go past. After he had gone, 2 soldiers rushed to the campfire. They were quarreling and fighting desperately, each trying to snatch from the other a boot they were both holding on to.
"You picked it up? I dare say. You're very smart," one of them shouted hoarsely.
Then a thin, pale soldier, his neck bandaged with a blood-stained leg band, came up and in angry tones asked the artillerymen for water.
"Must one die like a dog?" said he.
Tushin told them to give the man some water. Then a cheerful soldier ran up, begging a little fire for the infantry.
"A nice little hot torch for the infantry. Good luck to you, fellow countrymen." "Thanks for the fire. We'll return it with interest," said he, carrying away into the darkness a glowing stick.
Next came 4 soldiers, carrying something heavy on a cloak, and passed by the fire. One of them stumbled.
"Who the devil has put the logs on the road?" snarled he.
"He's dead. Why carry him?" said another.
"Shut up."
And they disappeared into the darkness with their load.
"Still aching?" Tushin asked Rostov in a whisper.
"Yes."
"Your Honor, you're wanted by the general. He is in the hut here," said a gunner, coming up to Tushin.
"Coming, friend."
Tushin rose and, buttoning his greatcoat and pulling it straight, walked away from the fire.
Not far from the artillery campfire, in a hut that had been prepared for him, Prince Bagration sat at dinner, talking with some commanding officers who had gathered at his quarters. The little old man with the half-closed eyes was there, greedily gnawing a mutton bone. And the general, who had served blamelessly for 22 years, flushed by a glass of vodka in the dinner, and the staff officer with the signet ring, and Zherkov uneasily glancing at them all, and Prince Andrew pale with compressed lips and feverishly glittering eyes.
In a corner of the hut stood a standard captured from the French, and the accountant, with the naive face, was feeling its texture, shaking his head in perplexity, perhaps because the banner really interested him, perhaps because it was hard for him, hungry as he was, to look on at a dinner where there was no place for him. In the next hut there was a French colonel who had been taken prisoner by our dragoons. Our officers were flocking in to look at him. Prince Bagration was thanking the individual commanders and inquiring into the details and the action of our losses, of the action. The general, whose regiment had been inspected at Braunau, was informing the prince that as soon as the action began, he had withdrawn from the wood, mustered the men who were woodcutting, and, allowing the French to pass him, had made a bayonet charge with 2 battalions and had broken up the French troops.
When I saw, Your Excellency, that their 1st battalion was disorganized, I stopped in the road and thought, I'll let them come on, and we'll meet them with the fire of the whole battalion. And that's what I did.
The general had so wished to do this, and was so sorry he had not managed to do it, that it seemed to him as if it had really happened. Perhaps it might really have been so? Could one possibly make out amid all that confusion what did or did not happen?
By the way, Your Excellency, I should inform you, he continued, remembering Dólokhov's conversation with Kutuzov and his last interview with the gentleman ranker, that Private Dólokhov, who was reduced to the ranks, took a French officer prisoner in my presence and particularly distinguished himself.
I saw the Pavlograd Hussars attacked there, Your Excellency, chimed in Zherkov, looking uneasily around. Zherkov seems to have recovered. He had not seen the Hussars all that day, but had heard about them from an infantry officer. They broke up 2 squares, Your Excellency.
Several of those present
so
smiled.
He's just a liar.
All of them are, it sounds like. But a lot of them liars.
Yeah, he's fully live. Oh, I saw them, and they're like, he didn't see them.
Several of these present smiled at Zirkov's words, expecting one of his usual jokes, but noticing that what he was saying redounded to the glory of our arms and of the day's work, they assumed a serious expression, though many of them knew that what he was saying was a lie devoid of any foundation. Prince Bagration turned to the old colonel.
Gentlemen, I thank you all. All arms have behaved heroically, infantry, cavalry, and artillery. How was it that 2 guns were abandoned in the center? He inquired, searching with his eyes for someone. Prince Bagration did not ask about the guns on the left flank. He knew that all the guns there had been abandoned at the very beginning of the action. I think I sent you? He added, turning to the staff officer on duty.
One was damaged, answered the staff officer, and the other I can't understand. I was there all the time giving orders, and had only just left. It is true that it was hot there, he added, modestly.
Someone mentioned Captain Tushin, who was bivouacking? What the hell?
Bivouacking.
Bivouacking.
Bivouacking! Let's look it up. A bivouac is a temporary camp without tents or cover.
Glamping.
Basically.
The opposite of glamping. Close to the village and had already been sent for.
Oh, but you were there, said Prince Bagration, addressing Prince Andrew.
Of course, we only just missed one another, said the staff officer with a smile to Bolkonsky.
I had not the pleasure of seeing you, said Prince Andrew, coldly and abruptly.
Another liar? All was silent. Tushin appeared at the threshold and made his way timidly from behind the backs of the generals. As he stepped past the generals in the crowded hut, feeling embarrassed as he always was by the sight of his superiors, he did not notice the staff of the banner and stumbled over it. Several of those present laughed. Screw you guys!
Oh, very sad. Poor Tushin. How was it a gun was abandoned? Asked Bagration, frowning, not so much at the captain as at those who were laughing, among whom Zirkov laughed loudest.
Oh, really, Zirkov?
Really, Mr. Panic.
He was like,
Panic Peter.
Panicky Peter. Panicky Piotr.
Piotr.
Only now, when he was confronted by the stern authorities, did his guilt and the disgrace of having lost 2 guns and yet remaining alive present themselves to Tushin in all their horror. He had been so excited that he had not thought about it until that moment. The officer's laughter confused him still more. He stood before Bagration with his lower jaw trembling and was hardly able to mutter, I don't know, Your Excellency. I had no meant, Your Excellency.
You might have taken some from the covering troops.
Tushin did not say that there were no covering troops, though that was perfectly true. He was afraid of getting some other officer into trouble and silently fixed his eyes on Bagration as a schoolboy who has blundered looks at an examiner.
The silence lasted some time. Prince Bagration, apparently not wishing to be severe, found nothing to say. The others did not venture to intervene. Prince Andrew looked at Tushin from under his brows, and his fingers twitched nervously.
Your Excellency, Prince Andrew broke the silence with his abrupt voice. You were pleased to send me to Captain Tushin's battery. I went there and found 2/3 of the men and horses knocked out, 2 guns smashed, and no support at all.
Prince Bagration and Tushin looked with equal intentness at Bolkonsky, who spoke with suppressed agitation. And
if Your Excellency will allow me to express my opinion, he continued, we owe today's success chiefly to the action of that battery and the heroic endurance of Captain Tushin and his company. And without awaiting a reply, Prince Andrew rose and left the table. Oh, that's a bit much.
Prince Bagration looked at Tushin.
He's a prince? Oh, no, yeah, but...
not Tushin.
Okay.
Evidently reluctant to show distrust in Bolkonsky's emphatic opinion, yet not feeling able fully to credit it, bent his head and told Tushin that he could go. Prince Andrew went out with him.
Thank you. You saved me, my dear fellow, said Tushin.
Prince Andrew gave him a look, but said nothing and went away. He felt sad and depressed. It was also strange, so unlike what he had hoped.
Who are they? Why are they here? What do they want? And when will this end? Thought Rostov, looking at the changing shadows before him. The pain in his arm became more and more intense. Irresistible drowsiness before his eyes, and the image of those voices and faces and a sense of loneliness merged with the physical pain. It was they, these soldiers, wounded and unwounded. It was they who were crushing, weighing down, and twisting the sinews and scorching the flesh of his sprained arm and shoulder. To rid himself of them, he closed his eyes.
For a moment he dozed, but in that short interval innumerable things appeared to him in a dream. His mother and her large white hand, Sonia's thin little shoulders, Natasha's eyes and laughter, Denisov with his voice and mustache, and Telyanin and all that affair with Telyanin and Bogdanich. That affair was the same thing as this soldier with the harsh voice, and it was that affair and this soldier that were so agonizingly, incessantly pulling and pressing his arm, and always dragging it in one direction. He tried to get away from them, but they would not for an instant let his shoulder move a hair's breadth. It would not ache, it would be well, if only they did not pull it, but it was impossible to get rid of them.
He opened his eyes and looked up. The black canopy of night hung less than a yard above the glow of the charcoal. Flakes of falling snow were fluttering in that light. Tushin had not returned. The doctor had not come. He was alone now, except for a soldier who was sitting naked at the other side of the fire, warming his thin yellow body.
Nobody wants me, thought Rostov. There is no one to help me or pity me. Yet I was once at home, strong, happy, and loved, he sighed, and doing so, groaned involuntarily.
Hey, is anything hurting you? Asked the soldier, shaking his shirt out over the fire, and not waiting for an answer, he gave a grunt and added, What a lot of men have been crippled today. Frightful.
Rostov did not listen to the soldier. He looked at the snowflakes fluttering above the fire and remembered a Russian winter at his warm, bright home. His fluffy fur coat, his quickly gliding sleigh, his healthy body, and all the affection and care of his family. Why did I come here? He wondered. Why?
Next day, the French army did not renew their attack, and the remnant of Bagration's detachment was reunited to Kutuzov's army. So yeah, Bagration's detachment and Kutuzov's army have been in two separate places.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, there was that time when
I think that's what I was trying to describe, that like they were trying to meet each other because they were vulnerable separate.
I thought you were saying that about the Austrians and the...
Right, okay. I was. I knew there were like two different armies, but yeah, you're right. That's in the book too.
It is?
Mm-hmm.
17% of the way through there.
Whew. Whew. We got this.
Meanwhile.
So I don't fully know everything that happened there.
Really?
But it was exciting.
I know everything that happened.
You can basically just recount that whole book to me.
What had happened was.
Mm-hmm. I mean, but it was exciting.
It was quite exciting.
And I really thought Nikolai was dead for a second.
Did you? I didn't. Because he's like a main character.
I know, but who knows?
He's like a main
There's
guy.
so many characters, though. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay.
Is it?
Yeah, just I'll clean that up in a second.
That's exactly what I was talking about.
Yeah, I know. At least it wasn't a lot.
Yeah.
I thought he might die. I still think he might die.
I mean, I'm not saying he's not gonna die ever. You know what I'm doing?
What?
I'm looking at the oh, that's the clean one.
The other one looks so dirty.
It is, because it's like for the floor and stuff.
Right.
But then now this is dirty.
Okay. What are you looking at?
I'm looking at on IMDb at the casting because I'm like in my mind's eye. I'm like maybe cast as Rostov?
They cast
Some bloke named Jack Loudon.
bloke.
He was in Dunkirk.
Never saw that. Oh. Meh. Sure is fine. Aisling Loftus.
I know what you mean.
Lily James. Adrian. I know most of these actors. Oh, Jim Broadbent. Oh, I think he plays the father. Cool. Andrew's father.
The scary one?
Yeah. Which makes sense. He's very good at yelling. Jim Broadbent.
Is he?
Yeah. I just started thinking Moulin Rouge. Everybody can.
Can't say I recall.
No.
He's Russell. Gillian Anderson's Anna Pavlovna Cheryl.
Oh.
Brian Cox.
Imagine casting that.
Mikhail Kuzov. Wow, okay, that makes sense.
I know this is really fascinating. Watching this on IMDb. I was surprised by how much I like enjoyed the battle. Like I felt myself getting swept up in it.
It's because you're
like,
bloodthirsty.
Whew. Like Tushin, that part, I thought that was quite good. And he's like elated. I don't know. I thought that description was really interesting. And then Prince Andrew, who apparently war is not always cracked up to be. Again, there's like so much
he's
of
doing
that.
A good job.
Like, he's doing a good job, but then like that the fact that he's like disgusted and he leaves the tent. I understand it.
He didn't leave the tent. He just got up. He left with Tushin and Tushin left.
Oh, he just got up from the table?
Yeah, just like dramatically. I don't know why he got up.
I mean, like, that's the other thing too, where I'm like, who's Prince Andrew to be so, like singular? Like, doesn't he respond? Like, doesn't he answer to someone? Isn't it kind of like in the army? It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter who your family is.
I mean,
You're in the army now,
true.
And it depends on like your status.
I don't know to what extent that's true. Yes, that is, I think, like an ideal of the army, maybe.
Yeah.
But it's clear that people, if they have privilege and whatever, like this guy's an adjutant because they have money.
Right.
I mean, that's like a lot of the beginning was about that.
Yeah.
Can we ask so and so to put him, place him here, place him there?
Yes,
but I don't think he was saying anything like. I think the guy genuinely, colonel or whatever, general, whatever, was like genuinely asking what had happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And sort of no one was saying anything.
Lying.
A lot of people were lying.
We're just covering their ass. And actually, it makes more sense why like Dolokhov was like, remember this.
Who was he yelling that at?
That was one of the generals, right?
Yeah.
It was one of the slimy generals who lied, I feel like. It's like, hey, I took this guy prisoner. I'm amazing. Remember this. Your stomach every day.
No, it's because I'm used to eating.
Craziness. Anyway, I don't know what is in store for book 3. Town.
Yeah.
No, Ifo.
It's like
She
a lot.
looked ahead.
There's a lot more war to go.
There's a lot of war. This war goes on till 1812, 1814.
Like the Corone. Corone. I'm not that good at spelling things fast. When my family like spells stuff for Ishan's, not for his benefit, but like to avoid him knowing things.
For his own benefit, yes.
Yeah, they're like, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, that was kind of fast.
Yeah.
B-L-A-C-K, I don't know.
I feel like I'm really slow at decoding it.
Me too. I'm like, I'm just trying to find who he said that to.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I think it was the guy. It was the head of Dolokov's regiment. The guy who was like huffing and puffing when Kutuzov came to visit them.
Oh, okay.
In Braunau.
Okay.
You know?
Right. And who yelled at him? Who yelled at him because it wasn't dressed correctly?
He got yelled at because Dolokhov was not dressed correctly.
Right. Okay. Yeah. That makes sense. That came around.
Yeah. And because Dolokhov was like dropped in rank, I think maybe he's not just any old like guy.
Yeah.
So for him to be like yelling at the guy in charge of him is like more feasible because of who he is.
Okay. It's all clear now.
Is it?
Yes.
Something's clear.
Anyway, good reading.
Good reading. Good read.
Yes. Well done.
Well done. Nicely.
Book 3 tomorrow. Bye.
Tomorrow.